My son-in-law shoved me into the wall of my own garage and walked away laughing. The next morning, I left an envelope on his doorstep. He texted me 20 minutes later. Finally came to your senses, old man. Knew you'd come around. He thought it was a check. Until he opened it. I was sorting through boxes of old fishing gear when my daughter called. She and her husband were coming over. Needed to talk about something important. I knew the tone. I'd heard it 4 times before. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years teaching high school history in Dayton, Ohio. I retired with a decent pension and a house I own outright, and I have one daughter named June. She's 34. She married her husband, my son-in-law, 3 years ago at the ceremony on a lake in northern Michigan. I cried during her vows. So did he, actually, I remember thinking. This one might be the real thing. His name is Trent. I remember the first time he asked me for money. It was 9 months after the wedding. He'd started a business, event photography, he said. Corporate events, weddings, that kind of thing. He needed a camera body, a second lens, maybe a laptop for editing. Could I help with startup costs? $4,000. I said yes. June was standing right there, biting her lip, the way she does when she's embarrassed. I wrote the check in my kitchen while Trent stood at my counter, eating my crackers and looking at his phone. He never started the business. 14 months later, $8,000 for a real estate licensing course, and the fees to set up an LLC. He had a plan. He'd flip houses. He'd read 3 books about it. He showed me a spreadsheet on his phone. I couldn't read the numbers in the light, but I nodded and wrote another check. He never got licensed. 6 months after that, $6,200 for a van he needed to start a moving company. His buddy had the equipment. They just needed the vehicle. It was a guaranteed income stream. He'd pay me back within a year, he swore. Showed me a business plan printed at the library, spiral-bound. He'd written his name on the tab in Sharpie. June smiled carefully while he talked. Not the real smile. The one she uses at school conferences and doctor's offices. I should have said no that 3rd time. I know that now. I said yes. He never bought the van. So, $18,200. That's the number I carried around for the year before he put his hands on me. I kept it in a folder in my filing cabinet, right behind the folder where I kept June's baby photos and her 1st grade report card. Organized. Document. I'm a history teacher. I keep records. They arrived on a Thursday. Late October, one of those gray Ohio afternoons where the sky looks like old concrete. Trent came through my door first, didn't knock, just walked in. June followed with her arms crossed over her jacket. They sat on my couch. I stayed standing. He wanted $25,000. A food truck, he said. He found one for sale in Cincinnati. His buddy had a commercial kitchen lined up. He already had a menu. He leaned forward when he said it, both elbows on his knees like a salesman at the close. I looked at June. She looked at the floor. I said no. I said, Trent, I've lent you $18,000 over 3 years. You've repaid none of it. The answer is no. He sat back. Something changed in his face. It wasn't anger exactly, not yet. More like recalibration, like a program searching for the next argument. He said, I thought family helped each other. I said, family also repays what they borrow. He stood up, started pacing. His voice got tighter, higher. He said I was sitting on a house, on a pension, on savings, while June was stressed and struggling, while they couldn't even go on vacation, while their apartment had a water stain on the ceiling that the landlord wouldn't fix, while June said his name quietly. He kept going. I said, this conversation is over. Thank you for visiting. That's when he grabbed my arm. Not a punch. A shove, really. He gripped my forearm with both hands and pushed me backward into the doorframe between my kitchen and my garage. The back of my head hit the frame hard enough to blur my vision for a second. I heard June gasp. Trent let go immediately, stepped back, looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Then he laughed. Not a real laugh. an embarrassed, covering sound. He said I'd overreacted, said I'd stumbled, said he was just gesturing. June was frozen. I touched the back of my head. My fingers came away clean. No blood. Probably no concussion. Probably. I said, very quietly, "Get out of my house." Trent grabbed his jacket off my kitchen chair. He said I'd regret this. He said, when I was old and alone, I'd wish I'd been more generous. He said June would always choose him, and I should remember that. The door slammed. June stood in my kitchen for another 10 seconds. I could see her deciding something. Then she said she was sorry, that he was just stressed, that she'd talked to him. Her voice was very small. She left. I sat at my kitchen table for an hour without moving. The fishing gear was still spread out on the garage floor. I'd been in the middle of replacing line on my old ugly Steck. The rod was leaning against the wall at an angle, the reel loose in my hand when they'd rung the doorbell. Now it was just sitting there. I had a neighbor, retired cop, spent his career in Hamilton County. His name is Arnold, and he's 71, and he knows things. I'd helped him move a refrigerator 3 summers ago, and after that, we'd become the kind of friends who have each other's numbers and actually use them. I called him that evening. He came over, sat at my table. I showed him my head. Just a knot, nothing serious. He asked me 4 questions. Were there witnesses? Did I document it? Did I have a history of the financial situation? Did I want to press charges? I said I didn't know yet. He said, take photos of your head tonight and tomorrow. Write down exactly what happened, time, date, words, sequence. Don't contact them. Don't post anything online. Don't talk to anyone else yet. I wrote everything down at 11 that night. 4 pages, yellow legal pad, pen, not pencil. The kind of documentation I use to require from students writing historical accounts. Primary source. First person. Specific details. My head hurt when I lay down to sleep. By morning, I decided. I had a former student, believe it or not. Taught her junior year American history, 1997. She was now a family law attorney in Dayton with a reputation for being methodical and unsentimental. Her name is Claudia. I'd seen her name in the paper twice in the last few years on cases that went the right way. I called her office at 8:30. Got a call back by 10. She listened without interrupting. Asked for the documentation. Told me to scan and email everything. The loan history, the bank records, the timeline I'd written. She'd review it and call me back that afternoon. She called at 4. She said, "You have a solid basis for a criminal complaint. You also have a civil claim for the money. These are separate tracks, and they affect each other strategically. Before we file anything, I want to ask you one question. What's the goal?" I thought about that. I said, I want him to understand there are consequences. I want June to see clearly. I want the money back if possible, and I want to make sure he doesn't do this to the next person. She said, that's 4 goals. We can pursue all of them, but you need to understand, it will not be a clean process. It will cost you relationships in the short term. It will cost you sleep. It may cost you your relationship with your daughter, at least temporarily. Are you prepared for that? I said I was. She said, good. Now, do you have any documentation of the loans? Texts, emails, anything in writing? I had every text. I had emails. I had a photograph of one of the checks, because I'd started photographing checks after the second loan for tax purposes. I had a bank statement showing each withdrawal. Claudia said, this is better than most of what I see. That evening, I drove to a Walgreens and bought a manila envelope, came home, printed the civil complaint Claudia had prepared. Assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, criminal track, loan recovery, fraud, breach of oral contract, civil track. Neatly organized. Claudia had paper-clipped a cover page with Trent's name and address and the case numbers. I put everything in the envelope. The next morning, I drove to their apartment complex in Kettering. I knew Trent would be home. He was usually home until noon. June worked the early shift at the hospital where she was a billing coordinator. I buzzed from the front entrance. He answered almost immediately. His voice was loose, casual. Yeah? I said I had something for him. He said to come up. I said I'd prefer he come down. Pause. He came down in gym shorts and a hoodie, sleep still on his face. When he saw me, he reset his expression. Tried for confident, landed somewhere between that and nervous. I held out the envelope. He looked at it. Then at me. Something moved across his face. Hope. Calculation. He'd been waiting for me to come around. He probably told June I would eventually. He took the envelope. He said, knew you'd see reason. He tore it open standing in the lobby while I watched. I saw the moment he registered what it was. The color didn't drain from his face exactly. It went a specific shade of gray, the color of wet sidewalk. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. He looked up. I said, the criminal complaint was filed yesterday. The civil suit was filed this morning. You'll be formally served within the week. The court date is on page 3. He said, this is insane. I said, my head disagrees. He said, June will never forgive you for this. I said, I'll take that risk. I walked out, got in my car, hands shaking slightly on the wheel. Not from fear, just adrenaline. I drove home, made coffee, called Claudia. Told her it was done. She said, how do you feel? I said, like I started something I can't stop. She said, that's the correct feeling. Now don't do anything else without calling me first. I agreed. I broke that agreement 11 days later, not intentionally. Or maybe intentionally, I'm still not sure. I was at a coffee shop downtown, the one near the library where I used to take my classes on research trips. Ran into an old friend from the teachers' union, a man named Dwight, who I'd worked alongside for 15 years. We hadn't seen each other since my retirement party. He asked how I was doing. I said I'd had a complicated few months. He asked what happened. I said it was a family situation. He pressed a little. I said my son-in-law and I were in litigation. Dwight's eyebrows went up. He said, anything I can do? I said, actually, there might be. Do you still know people at the school board? He did. And that was the beginning of the mistake that wasn't entirely a mistake. 2 days after I saw Dwight, I got a call from a woman named Beverly. She identified herself as a former business partner of Trent's. She'd seen my name. Apparently, Dwight knew someone who knew June, and the circles were smaller than I'd thought. Beverly said she had a story. Said Trent had done to her what he'd apparently done to me. Partner investment, $22,000. Dissolution. No repayment. One incident of physical intimidation in a parking lot. She hadn't reported it. She'd signed something. A settlement agreement. But she said the settlement agreement didn't cover criminal testimony, and she'd looked it up. She wanted to talk. I called Claudia before I called Beverly back. Claudia said, send her to me directly. Don't meet with her yourself yet. Let me vet this. I sent Beverly to Claudia. Meanwhile, Trent had not been quiet. He'd sent me 14 texts in 9 days. I read them all, forwarded them all to Claudia, responded to none of them. He'd also apparently contacted my neighbor Arnold directly, which Arnold told me about with some amusement. Trent had wanted Arnold to talk sense into me. Arnold had explained politely that he wasn't going to do that. June called me on day 12. She was crying before she finished saying my name. She said, Dad, please. You're destroying his life. I said, he borrowed $18,000 and shoved me into a wall. She said, he's not sleeping. He's panicking. He's not himself. I said, June, who is he himself? Silence. I said, I need to ask you something. Has he ever done anything like this to you? Anything physical? More silence. Then, no. Never. I believed her. I still believe her, but the silence before the answer was 6 seconds long, and I counted everyone. She said, Dad, if you do this, Things will never be the same between us. I said, things changed the day he put his hands on me. That's not something I caused. She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while, looked at her school photo on my refrigerator. 6th grade. She's wearing a yellow shirt and she's missing a tooth on the right side. The adult one took forever to come in. And she's laughing at something the photographer said right before the flash. I didn't sleep well that night. Beverly checked out. Claudia called me the following week, professional and direct. Beverly had documentation, photos of a text thread, a signed partnership agreement, a handwritten letter from Trent promising repayment, and a photograph of her own car with a cracked windshield, taken the night she confronted Trent in the parking lot. She'd assumed he'd kicked it. Couldn't prove it. But she'd photographed it the next morning. Pattern, Claudia said. Pattern is everything. Beverly agreed to testify. Then, 2 days before the hearing, Claudia called me with a complication. Beverly had moved. Not out of state, across the county, to her sister's place in Springboro. She was available. But her ex-husband had found out she was testifying and had contacted Trent's attorney. Nothing actionable, Claudia said, but it had rattled Beverly. She was still coming. She just needed reassurance. I called Beverly myself. Claudia had told me not to, but I did it anyway. Beverly picked up on the second ring. I introduced myself. We talked for 40 minutes. She told me about her own version of Trent. The charm, first. The patience. The sense that he really believed in you. That you were partners in something real. Then, the slow shift. The money conversations. The pressure. The parking lot. She said, the worst part is that I doubted myself for a long time. Thought maybe I'd misread the partnership. Thought maybe the financial problems were real and he just couldn't repay me. I said, I know that feeling. She said, when did you stop doubting yourself? I thought about that. I said, when my head hit the doorframe. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll be there. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in a Montgomery County courtroom that smelled like floor wax and old paper. I wore my good gray suit, the one from June's college graduation. Claudia wore navy and looked like she'd been doing this for 40 years, which she hadn't, but close enough. Trent came in with his attorney. He was wearing a tie I didn't recognize. It looked new. He didn't look at me. June wasn't there. I'd half expected her to be in the gallery. She wasn't. The prosecution presented the evidence in order. My medical records from the urgent care I'd gone to 2 days after the incident. Claudia had insisted, even when I said I was fine. Photographs. The timeline I'd written. The text messages from Trent afterward, 14 of them, a few edging toward threatening. Arnold's brief statement about the subsequent contact he'd received. Beverly's testimony. Beverly was on the stand for 22 minutes. She described the parking lot incident without drama, just facts, sequence, the cracked windshield, the text she'd sent her sister that night saying she was scared. Her voice was steady. She was a 51-year-old accountant from Springboro, and she had every document organized in a 3-ring binder she'd brought herself. The defense tried to shake her on the NDA. She quoted the carve-out for criminal proceedings from memory. Trent's attorney argued it was an isolated incident between me and Trent, that the financial disputes were separate, that Beverly's testimony was irrelevant character evidence. The judge said she'd consider it as pattern evidence. Overruled. Trent testified briefly. He said I'd stumbled. He said he'd reached out to steady me. He said the money was loans he fully intended to repay, and that my lawsuit was retaliation for him standing up to financial pressure. He was calm on the stand. I'll give him that. Practiced. Then June walked in. She came through the side door, the one near the jury box. She was still in her work badge. She'd come straight from her shift. She sat in the gallery for 4 minutes while Trent's cross-examination wrapped up. Then she stood and asked to approach the bench. Trent's head came up like he'd heard a sound he couldn't place. June was sworn in. She said she'd been present on the evening of the incident. She said she'd seen her husband grab her father's arm. She said she'd seen her father's head contact the door frame. She said she'd frozen in the moment, and she'd been ashamed of that ever since. She said I should have done something sooner, in the room and after. Trent stood up. His attorney grabbed his arm. He said, "Loud enough for the room. June, what are you doing?" The judge said, "Sit down." He sat. June said, "I'm telling the truth." She stepped down. She walked past me without stopping. But her hand brushed my shoulder. Once, briefly. I don't know if she meant it as a signal, or if it was just the space being narrow. I chose to take it as what I needed it to be. The verdict came before lunch. Guilty on assault and battery. Misdemeanor, given the circumstances, but it goes on record. Sentencing, 90 days suspended, completion of an anger management program, a restraining order, 100 yards, and restitution. The restitution covered my medical expenses and 1/3 of the outstanding loan balance, which Claudia said was the realistic ceiling for criminal restitution. The civil suit was still pending. That would take longer. Trent was led out a side door. He didn't look back. I found Claudia in the hallway. She shook my hand, which felt formal and right. She said, "You prepared well. The documentation made this case." I said, "I had a good teacher once." She laughed because she knew I meant her being my student, the joke going in both directions. I stood by the window at the end of the corridor. The parking lot below, ordinary cars, ordinary afternoon. June found me there. We stood side by side for a moment, without speaking. She still had her hospital badge clipped to her jacket. Her ID photo made her look younger than she is. She said, "I should have called you the night it happened." I said, "You were figuring things out." She said, "I kept telling myself it was one thing, that it was stress, that it wouldn't happen again." I didn't say anything. She said, "He called my supervisor this morning. Tried to say I was emotionally compromised and couldn't be trusted with my job." My jaw tightened. She said, "HR is looking into it. My supervisor knows me. I think it'll be okay." I said, "I'm sorry he did that." She said, "I'm sorry it took me this long." We drove separately to my house. I made sandwiches. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd written Garrett's name 4 times on legal documents, where I'd sat for an hour without moving after they left that night. We ate and didn't talk much, and that was all right. Over the following weeks, Trent's event photography business, the first one, the original idea from 3 years ago, turned out to have a Facebook page with 14 followers and no posts since 2022. His LLC for the real estate venture was dissolved for non-payment of fees. There was no moving company. I'd known all of this, but seeing it confirmed in writing was something else. He moved out of the Kettering apartment. June told me he'd gone to stay with a cousin in Columbus. The food truck idea apparently followed him there. He'd found another investor, someone who didn't know him. I thought about warning that person. I called Claudia. She said, "You can't proactively contact potential victims without knowing who they are. If you learn a specific name, call me. We'll figure out the right channel." I said, "This will happen again." She said, "Probably. But you've created a record. You've created documentation. The next person has something to find now. That didn't feel like enough. It never fully does." The civil suit settled 7 months later. I recovered $11,200 out of $18,000. It arrived as a wire transfer on a Wednesday morning. I sat and looked at the number on my screen for a long time. June filed for divorce in March. She called me the night before she filed. We talked for 2 hours. She cried at several points. I didn't, not on the phone, but afterward, sitting in my reading chair with the lamp on and the house quiet around me, I did. She moved into an apartment 3 miles from my house. She comes to dinner most Sundays. She doesn't talk about Trent much. When she does, it's with the particular flatness people use when they're still processing something they don't have language for yet. I don't push. She asked me once, a few months in, if I'd known it would cost this much. Would I still have done it? I told her the truth. I said I'd have done it faster. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she nodded, one slow nod, like she was accepting something. The fishing rod is still in my garage. I finally finished respooling it in December. I took it out to a small lake east of the city on a Saturday in January, the cold kind of clear where everything looks sharper than usual. Caught nothing. Stayed 4 hours. Drove home. I'd do it again. The rod. The 4 hours. All of it. If you found something in this story that felt familiar, something in the pattern, the pressure, the way it builds slowly and then all at once, leave it in the comments. I'd like to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if this is your first time here, subscribe. There are more of these. They're all true, or close enough to true that the difference doesn't matter much. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. Not the shove, not the wall, not even the 14 texts Trent sent afterward, each one a little more desperate than the last. The hardest part was sitting at my kitchen table the night June hung up on me, looking at her 6th grade photo on the refrigerator, and choosing to keep going anyway. That's the thing nobody tells you about doing the right thing. It rarely feels clean. It rarely feels good. It usually just feels like loss with a receipt attached. I've been thinking about what actually made the difference in this whole situation, and it comes down to 3 things that I didn't fully appreciate until I was standing in that courthouse hallway, watching June walk toward me in her hospital scrubs. The first is documentation. I kept records because I'm a history teacher, and that's what history teachers do. But what I've come to understand is that documentation isn't just a legal tool. It's a form of self-respect. It's saying, what happened to me is real. It is specific, and I will not let it be rewritten. Every time trying to say I'd stumbled, that I'd overreacted, that the money was complicated, I had paper, dates, amounts, a timeline I'd written by hand at 11 at night when my head still hurt. The truth doesn't require anyone's agreement if you've recorded it carefully enough. The second is patience of a specific kind, not passive patience. Not the patience of waiting and hoping someone changes, the patience of not doing the next thing until you've thought it through. I broke that twice. The call to Dwight that spiraled outward, the moment I contacted Beverly directly when Claudia had told me not to. Both of those could have cost me. The lesson wasn't that I should have been paralyzed with caution. The lesson was that impulse and righteousness can feel identical in the moment, and only one of them actually helps you. The third is harder to name. It has something to do with being willing to absorb the cost of being right. Trent called June's hospital. He tried to take her job. He filed counter threats. He sent a photograph designed to make me feel like I'd already lost. Every one of those moves was meant to make me decide the price was too high. And every time, I had to sit with the real question, which wasn't, can I afford this, but what happens if I stop? Another investor. Another person who didn't know him. Another family who'd find out the slow way. Beverly said something to me on the phone that I keep coming back to. She said the worst part wasn't the money or the parking lot. The worst part was doubting herself for so long afterward. I know that feeling. I sat with it too, for months before the shove. Every time I wrote another check and told myself it was different this time, this was family. What I know now is that the doubt Trent created in me was intentional. That's the mechanism. Make you question your own read on things until you can't trust your own judgment anymore. The antidote isn't anger. It's just the slow, quiet work of returning to what you actually observed, what you actually documented, what you actually know. June comes to dinner most Sundays now. We don't talk about Trent much. When we do, she has this particular stillness that I recognize as someone who is still putting things in order inside themselves. I don't rush her. I just make sure there's enough food and that the door is unlocked when she arrives. That's what's left after everything. A door that's unlocked, a table with 2 plates, a daughter finding her way back. That's enough.